Please start. Professor Debroy?
A very good afternoon to everybody present here, especially to Professor Gautam Ghoshal sir. And we are here on the third day for our fourth lecture in this series of web lectures organized by our junior colleague, Professor Milan Mondol of the Department of English, Narajole Raj College. I would now request Professor Mondol to please introduce our speaker and begin the day's session.
Thank you, Professor Debroy. A very good afternoon to one and all on my behalf once again. And today we have with us Professor Gautam Ghoshal. Actually, now I would like to gladly introduce him. Professor Ghoshal, Delete, is a former professor and head of the Department of English, Vishwabharati, a central university, Shantiniketan. He was the chief editor of the Vishwabharati Quarterly from 2005 to 2007. Apart from Tagore and Aurobindo, his areas of interest include 19th century British and American literature, Shakespeare's poetry, and Rabindra Sangeet. Ghoshal's books include Sri Aurobindo's Prose Time, Sri Aurobindo and World Literature, Notes on Prayers and Meditation, Rainbow Bridge, a comparative study of Tagore and Sri Aurobindo, and many others. He is a co-editor of the first reprint of James Robins's 1970 book, New Ways in English Literature, which came out recently with a long introduction to Sri Aurobindo's theory of poetry, which the book initiated. Ghoshal has lectured at various universities in India and abroad. He was awarded with Nolinikanta Gupta Award in 2009 and Sri Aurobindo Award in 2012. So, we are very happy to have you here, sir. And now the platform is all for you, sir. Over to you, sir. Please, sir.
So, good afternoon, everybody. Can you hear me properly?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
So, because my voice is not very loud. Now, the exact renaissance in American literature, it began to take shape in the late 1820s. And you will remember that the Asiatic Society of Kolkata was founded in 1780. And most of the romantics were aware of the translated great texts, Indian texts translated in the Asiatic Society, and it was transported to England. But in terms of receptivity, the Americans were more receptive than Keats, Wordsworth, Shelley, Byron, and Coleridge. Not that they didn't receive it, they had some clues to greater things through these texts, which was known as royal literature in America, because most of the texts that were found in the libraries from 1830s onwards, they were translated by Ram Mohan Roy. So these things were known in America as royal literature. And so there were two groups of transcendentalists. When you speak of transcendentalism, The problem is in the class we are taught that there is just one transcendentalism. But there is a good book by Lawrence Buell, which came out in 1973, much before Buell became known as a great theoretician of ecology. Buell wrote a very interesting book on this American Renaissance, and it was titled uh, Literary Transcendentalism, Style and Vision in the American Renaissance. So what is literary transcendentalism? This is the difference between the group of Emerson and another group of transcendentalists in America who did not write much, who did not think in terms of literature. No, I'm not opening the camera because I'm not comfortable with the camera. And also, I don't look like Borun Dhawan, so my face is important. I don't think. So it's no use using an old face. Just listen to what I'm saying. So there is one group called Transcendentalists, and there is another group which called Literary Transcendentalists. This I came to know when I took up Lawrence Buell in the early 80s or maybe late 1970s, when I approached Buell's book in the American Center, Kolkata. It is a marvelous book. It's still available in Amazon, but people go for his books on the environment. This is also important. So what is the difference between transcendentalists and literary transcendentalists? Transcendentalists are like George Ripley, Orestes Brownson, George Ripley, Orestes Brownson, and Theodore Parker. These were people who thought in the line of Emerson, but they were not literary people. They were writing in terms of philosophy, and so they did not interest much. George Ripley, Theodore Parker, Orestes Brownson, and they were not interesting. So it was a literary transcendentalism that became popular in the wake of the Renaissance. And why is Emerson so important in the context of American Renaissance? Because if you think of Ram Mohan Rai as a nation builder, he had a huge cultural heritage behind him. The entire textual material that are ascribed to the name of the Hindus, because these people lived by the Indus River, but they were not actually meant for any particular class. And although a certain political party is trying to prove that these were only meant for the Hindus, no. They were meant for humanity at large. And one of the contributions of Sri Aurobindo is that he stripped Hinduism from these texts and made it accessible to the world. That is why Sri Aurobindo is such a big hit today with all people from all religions, because he has stripped the Hindu part. He says at the beginning of his Gita, that the Gita is not a sectarian text. And so this interpretation was needed. As for Emerson, he was, along with Thoreau, who came slightly late, he was also, he was very poor initially, he suffered a lot. That is why He was writing from heart or from soul, and it was experiential throughout. And in the late 70s, when I started my research work, I was told by most of the critics that Emerson is not an original writer. He borrowed mostly from the Indian writers and other writers. This is wrong. I will explain why. Let's come back to the point of transcendentalism, which means the same as Wordsworth says, man, nature, God. And the stress is on the individual, not on church or any God. This is very important because uh, if you worship a particular God, then you separate yourself from others. So Emerson took out God from the church and he placed it inside the human soul. And he saw the outside and the inside as one, as Sri Aurobindo says in a letter, the inner must prepare before the outer follows. Now, this great liberation of the individual, this is the most major contribution of Emerson, and he had nothing behind him in America. It was a savage race. They were imitating from Europe only. And just at that point, at that juncture, Emerson came and rebuilt America as a new nation. And don't think that women were neglected, because one of Emerson's right hands was a woman called Margaret Fuller, who first spoke of a very clear and convincing feminist ideology, uh, which today is known as womanism in the millennium, even much after Gayatri Spivak and others. The new slogan is womanism, not feminism. And Margaret Fuller was even the editor of Emerson's journal, The Dial, which was this spokes, which was the main communicative tool of American transcendentalism. The Dial, which Margaret Fuller edited between 1841 and 1842. And about the concept of poetry, which is so important, as Sri Aurobindo has clarified later, that poetry is the highest form of art, and Sri Aurobindo places poetry at the center of knowledge. When I said you are a great philosopher, he said, no, I'm not a philosopher. I'm primarily a poet and a politician. So he was a cosmic politician and he was a poet. And only poet can refine our consciousness. A poetry can refine our consciousness, the Vedic Agni, the Rig Vedic Agni, which purifies. And these things were not meant for any religion. The Hindus, they claim that they are the lords of these texts, but no, Sri Aurobindo has totally negated the idea, and that is why you have the whole world now coming to Pondicherry and getting his explanations of the great texts of India. So Ram Mohan had that heritage background as background, but Emerson was totally, in that way, I think Emerson's contribution is larger than Ram Mohan Roy. As Ram Mohan Roy had a tradition behind him, a heritage behind him, but Emerson was very unfortunate. America was a new nation and it was full of the savage spirit. And Emerson came out uh, opening his soul and allowing and asking everybody to open the soul to the great secrets of living well, living harmoniously, and bridging the inner life and the outer life properly. So this is the first thing about Emerson, the first uh, uh, which you should remember. And he was born in 1803, and Whitman left school in 1830 at age 11. Whitman left school and he became a carpenter. So Whitman was not in the scene then. And it is very unfortunate that although I'm a great fan of Whitman, Mark Twain, and Hemingway, and I've specialized on them too, but it is rather unfortunate that their global fame has subdued or buried the great contribution of Emerson as a nation builder. Now, talking of nation building, Emerson once again gives trace in his Phi Beta Kappa address, which came out, which was delivered in 1837, 31 August. And that was a seminal lecture from Emerson. It was entitled The American Scholar. A scholar is not a man covered up by books. Scholar has an extra pair of eyes on his forehead or on her forehead. And first, Emerson speaks of the influence of nature on the scholar, and he is exactly echoing and illustrating, elaborating what Wordsworth had already said in the later part of the 18th century and the first years of the 18th century, 19th century. So, influence of nature, because the scholar has to be developed. Scholar means the leader of the country. How should be the leader of America? Who should be the leader of America? He must be an integral personality. Who is an integral personality? He's a poet, he's a politician, he's a humanitarian, and he combines all these aspects together with the same kind of stress on everything without losing balance. And that is integral culture. The word integral culture, integral philosophy, integral psychology is new in India, and this puts some of my colleagues in trouble when they interview a candidate. But this has to be recognized now. Integral culture means you embrace life from all its aspects. And Sri Aurobindo is the greatest theoretician on that. Emerson was foreshadowing that. And the next great influence on the life of a scholar is tradition or past. The past, and Emerson speaks of books, and also he speaks of rejecting the books and relying more on nature. And here Emerson uses a word called distillation. It's very interesting, and it's perfectly related to Eliot's essay Tradition and Individual Talent, which came out, say, about 62, 63 years later in 1919. And it is very unfortunate that Eliot, and we know that Eliot was extremely egoistic, was unwilling to give any place to any American beside him. It's a I don't say that it is a bad essay. It's a wonderful essay with some limitations, of which I have spoken in my other lectures. You can see them in YouTube. But the total forgetfulness about Emerson while talking of tradition is not just an error, it is a sin. And it is a major sin on the part of T.S. Eliot. Because if you see Emerson's examinations and analysis of the concept of tradition, it is far more clear, far more lucid, far more acceptable and comprehensive than what Eliot says in his tortured prose sometimes in Tradition and Individual Talent. Because at some part in Tradition and Individual Talent, Eliot doesn't know what he tries to mean. And sometimes he comes close to Wordsworth's theory of poetry, even without knowing that he is speaking of passive attending upon the event and poetry as emotion recollected in tranquility unconsciously. So, and the point of chemical transformation, that also comes from Emerson. What is distillation in Emerson is chemical transformation in Eliot. So it is a major sin in Eliot to have omitted Emerson, because he wanted to omit these things are done. Satyendra never did this. He said, আমার চেয়ে ঋত্বিক অনেক বেশি বাঙালি পরিচালক. And that is the best tribute about Ritik Ghotok from another great director. Satyendra never did this. He said, আমার চেয়ে ঋত্বিক অনেক বেশি বাঙালি পরিচালক. And he meant the native talent in Ritik Ghotok. And also the spiritual stuff. Because Satyendra was basically an intellectual talent, an intellectual genius. So then Emerson says that the soul is progressive, it is not static. So when you read the books, you must know that the books are static, and you have to think of the progress of the soul. You can't be static with an utterance of the past. You have to see. You have to see what is there in the future in the utterance, what the author could not say. That relates to, once again, to your new theory, the death of the author, and multiple readings, multiple interpretations from a text. And the point is, from the text, you have to be evolutionary, progressive. And there, Emerson shifts to the point of action or duty in life, karma, in our text, in our scripture. So action is life sense. If you know T.S. Eliot, if you compare T.S. Eliot with Ernest Hemingway, the distinction becomes clear. Whitman Hemingway is a far greater scholar than T.S. Eliot, because he lived the life, not that he didn't read books. The recent record from his school in Oak Park, it says that he borrowed 1,088 books from his school library. This is Ernest Hemingway, whom we know as a man of action. So action is important, and Eliot was more of an introvert, an egocentric person who read too much and who couldn't, as David Ditches has rightly said in the Delhi seminar in 1963, that Eliot is a great minor poet. Because life must be lived full square. You know, you write, your sentences must come out of life, not from books. Your speech to the nation must come out of your soul. It must not be dictated by Gladstone and Disraeli. You can read them, but what you speak to Indians or what you speak to Americans, it must be the voice of your soul. So a nation needs an original mind. The leader must be original, and this originality comes out or is shaped out of the fire of life, as Emerson has experienced. He suffered a lot in his early years. Later, his lectures were sold well. He became famous. He had some money later. But initially, it was very tough for him, as it was also for Whitman. He did all kinds of jobs, from carpentry to journalism, everything, before writing Leaves of Grass. And interestingly, there is an essay by, not by Sri Aurobindo, but by Aurobindo Ghosh, because he was in Baroda then and he was not Sri Aurobindo then still. It might have been written in the late 1890s, and the essay is entitled On Original Thinking. And there Sri Aurobindo says, no, you should not imitate any past scholars, text interpreters. Ramanujan has said this. Shankara has said this. So I have to repeat that. Sri Aurobindo says, no, because the soul is evolving. And Emerson speaks of that, the evolving soul in American Scholar, of the progressive soul. Because man sees with the eyes on his forehead, the eyes are not at the back of his head. So on original thinking is something like an extension of Emerson's thought that life should be lived forward, and you can think of the past, but it should be lived forward. We do not belong to the past dawns, but to the noons of the future. And as to the point of, a very subtle point of the interplay of individualism and the stress of society. And I would like to refer to Karl Marx and Bertrand Russell. Both are wrong. Russell gives excessive stress on the individual, as if the individual is free to do anything. So he becomes a Charles Sovraj. You can't stop him. And Marx gives too much stress on the state. State is the supreme commander. The individual has become pygmies. And the efflorescence of the soul, the flowering of the soul is not there. And you can't see the whole landscape. As Emerson says, the poet is he who sees the integrity of the whole landscape. So two extremes. Russell is stressing on the individual and Marx is stressing on the state. So both are in a way correct and at the same time wrong. And Emerson came for the first time much before Sri Aurobindo to tell us that the individual has to be totally free so that it can contribute to society with the proper kind of balance, not affecting the totality. So the action of the individual should not affect the progress of society, the progress of the other individual. This is where Emerson becomes a pioneer of the age of Sri Aurobindo, which is now started, because the individual is important so that it can make scope for other individual. And you will see teachers who are always making coteries and they are not giving out things and other things. You close yourself up, in the words of Blake. And as the life is also evolving, as Heraclitus had said in 6th century BC, that you can't take a dip into the same water twice, because the water is flowing forward. A pur se move, the earth moves forward, Galileo said. So in this continuously moving planet, moving consciousness, the individual has to make room for other individuals. That is, the individual's contribution to society, to collective living. And what a master Emerson was here. And there is no study yet comparing Emerson and Sri Aurobindo, but there should be one study. There is a beautiful study on Whitman and Sri Aurobindo by my wife. That is a pioneering book, but there, as of now, there is no comparative study on Emerson and Sri Aurobindo. and that is needed. Emerson and Sri Aurobindo balances between the individual and society, because the role of the individual is to create space for other individual. আমিও থাকবো, অন্য লোকও থাকবে। তো এই অ্যাডজাস্টমেন্টটা, it was not clear to the vision of Karl Marx, neither to Bertrand Russell, because it was, for Russell, it was a kind of egocentricity, because the intellectual cannot be the same with others. But the new philosophy is the intellectual must come down to the earth and lift the mediocrity to super heights. That is Sri Aurobindo's philosophy. That 10% people will grow up, receive knowledge, light from above. But what would happen to who are below? These individuals will drag them up to their level. This is how society will progress and develop in future times. This you will see in Sri Aurobindo's book, The Human Cycle. Finally, the point, are you, am I audible?
Yes, sir.
So my final point is creativity and non-fiction. So much of the negligence Emerson received, or I myself receive, because I also write non-fiction of a different kind, not with 20,000 words in the footnotes and 5,000 words in the main essay. I don't write like that. I write with minimum of footnotes, and everything is there inside. I try. And my boss, my guru, Shishir Kumar Ghosh, Krishnamurti, they also did the same thing. There were no footnotes. So non-fiction is not a creative art. This myth has been growing for many years. This myth that non-fiction, fiction is only creative art. Poetry is only creative art. Non-fiction is scholarly work with footnotes. Somebody said, funnily, in America, an editor, I remember, footnotes are like going to respond to the calling bell when you are making love. Very interesting. So these footnotes are not creative non-fiction. The really creative writer of non-fiction gives very little footnotes or even no footnotes. And this should be accommodated in our scholarly journals, because as Emerson has explained, the scholar is a man of experience. He won't quote, he won't give long quotations to make it 10,000 words, 7,000 words. He will write his own stuff, maybe in 2,000 words, 1,000 words. So what is creativity in non-fiction? Let me end with these words. What is creativity in non-fiction? Because every sentence must be pulsating with life. You will see, if you read the essays of these papers, only the writer, I am the only reader of my paper. And the title has to be extremely difficult so that nobody knows the meaning of the title. That shows how great a scholar I am. So my jihad is against this, that come back to the basics, come back to the classics, and come back to plain title. A title is the précis of précis. So your title, or it will not be read. A writing is written, a writing is done to be read. Unfortunately, the author becomes the only writer, the only reader. These things must go. You must write clearly, and every sentence must be living. What do I mean by living sentence? Where you put your experience. Shishir Kumar Ghosh starts his book Later Poems of Tagore with one sentence which gives you the cream of the entire classic book. He starts the book with one sentence: the last of Tagore lights up the first. Fantastic. And about chemical transformation, actually, the entire thing is inside you, it is being built. But as Eliot says, that your individual personality will initiate this chemical transformation. Now, what Eliot cannot clarify properly is that this chemical transformation is an intuitive act. It is not an intellectual act. And intuition is a greater weapon to know knowledge than intellect. Intellect is the beginning of knowledge, and intuition gives you a greater access to knowledge. So, chemical transformation is your creativity, and that comes from nowhere. The last of Tagore lights up the first. Talking of the later poems of Tagore. And Emerson on Thoreau. See the sentence. He is writing Thoreau's obituary, and he writes a sentence which you cannot improve upon, and which is pregnant with thought, and which speaks all about Thoreau's consciousness. One sentence on Thoreau. Emerson writes on Thoreau's obituary. Thoreau died at age 46. He was junior to Emerson. Unfortunately, he died at age 46, at the peak of his maturity. And Emerson wrote, he chose to be rich by making his wants few. কি সাংঘাতিক কথা, আর কি সাংঘাতিক ক্রিয়েটিভিটি। নন ফিকশন আনক্রিয়েটিভ, এই সেন্টেন্স লিখতে পারবে কেউ? আজকালকার বাঙালি কবিরা, বিরাট বিরাট যে সমস্ত আধুনিক কবিরা আছে, এই সেন্টেন্স এমারসনের একটা লিখতে পারবে? He chose to be rich by making his wants few. থোরো বড়লোক হতে চেয়েছিলেন, তার চাহিদা কমিয়ে ফেলে। He chose to be rich. Notice the sentence, and the sentence is a discovery. It comes as a chemical transformation of all that he has read in the past. He chose to be rich by making his wants few. And that shows that Emerson is advocating, although maybe he is not able to live like Thoreau, because as a person, Thoreau was greater than Emerson. And Emerson recognizes that. He chose to be rich. আমরা যখন বলি richly lived life, it was a richly lived life, তার মানে আমরা এটা বলি না যে সে বাড়িতে বিরিয়ানি খেত, কি তার বাথরুমে কটা এসি আছে, এটা নয়। He chose to be rich by making his want. Chawa, the mother says in one of his diary entries, it is a disgrace that you want something from life. এত চাওয়া কেন? So this is the essence of living which the moderns have lost. So if you go through Emerson, you go through the basics, like Tagore, like Sri Aurobindo, like Thoreau, like Whitman. He takes us back to the basics, that this is how you live life integrally, collectively, without clashing with your neighbor. So nonfiction is extremely creative. And sometimes, if you read Krishnamurti's notebook, you will see every line is creative and every line is poetry. And there are two kinds of lyrical prose. One is concealed poetry. One is concealed poetry, and one is poetry itself in disguise. এত রাত্রে কে ডাকাটা কি করে সহজ পাঠে, and it thrills you যে সহজ পাঠে এই লাইনটা কোত্থেকে আসছে, what is this line doing in সহজ পাঠ, এত রাত্রে কে ডাকাটা কি করে, and it gives you that thrill. This question, as Longinus has said, that questions contribute to the sublime. Well, questions have started coming. If someone please choose the questions and bring it to me, I can answer.
Yes, sir. I will take over that role of reading out the questions. Yes. So let me go to the. Just a moment. I lost the questions. Yeah, I've got them. Yes, sir. The first question is Professor Milan Mondal. He wants to have the idea chemical transformation of Eliot a bit clarified.
So, what Eliot tries to mean by chemical transformation is also a kind of discovery, and Eliot forgets about Shakespeare and discovery when he speaks of this of this mechanical transformation of poetry, of tradition, because poetry is discovered
Thanks.
like uh, uh, the Thane of Fife had a wife, where is she now? Still it cried to all the house. Clemis hath murdered sleep, therefore Cawdor shall sleep no more. Macbeth shall sleep no more. This goes beyond all tradition. So this is not chemically transformed, but this is discovered. And what is chemically transformed is actually an issue of inspiration, which Eliot fails to clarify, because he is too intellectual. And when you get too intellectual, you block all the doors of intuition. He's a great prose writer. I'm a great fan of T.S. Eliot, the prose writer. Unfortunately, his poetry itself is, he cannot forget his reading, always trying to chemically transform his reading. ঋত্বিক ঘটক once said, এমন একটি ভাষা হবে যেটি রেফারেন্সে ভারাক্রান্ত হবে না, যেটি মনে পড়িয়ে দেবে। এমন একটি ভাষা হবে যেটি রেফারেন্সে ভারাক্রান্ত হবে না, যেটি মনে পড়িয়ে দেবে। This is elusive style, and by chemical transformation, Eliot does not, he neither clarifies it nor he practices it. Next question.
Yes, sir. This is by Shonjeev Kumar Mondol, one of our participants, and he asks, transcendentalists like created an American state of mind in which imagination was better than reason, creativity was better than theory, and action was better than contemplation. Can we say that Milton was also a transcendentalist when he wrote Paradise Lost, because he wrote, mind is its own place, in itself can make a heaven of hell and hell of heaven?
The difference is Milton's structure is all thought out, not seen. He is a great thinking mind, whereas the transcendentalists are not just thinkers, but they are intuitive seers. Rarely does Milton see. He constructs intellectually. Milton's structures are thought out, not seen. Unlike Dante's, unlike Rabindranath's, the structure is seen, not thought out. দিকে দিগন্তে যত আনন্দ লোভিয়াছে এক গভীর গন্ধ আমারও চিত্ত মিলিয়ে একত্রে তোমারও মন্দিরে উচ্ছ্বাসে. The structure is seen, not thought out. So the transcendentalists are not thinking things, they are also seeing things. This is the difference between Milton and the transcendentalists.
Yes, sir. The next question is by Professor Shomi Kuila. He wants to know actually what is Emerson's philosophy? Is it the power or anything else?
In brief, Emerson is speaking of an integral philosophy. I have said that at the beginning of my talk, that integral philosophy means you leave out no aspect of life, the material and the spiritual, the the simple, ordinary things, ordinary emotions, ordinary loves are as important as big loves, and the simple material things are surcharged with the light of the spirit. So he sees life as a whole, and this is called integral philosophy, which is not just God oriented like the past philosophers. The past philosophers were all God oriented, but they were not material. Emerson's, somebody has asked, what, how does transcendentalism help? Transcendentalism helps us to live well, integrally, by, by harmonizing with the others who are around us, because we are always quarreling with others, our friends, our classmates, our teachers, our students. We are always fighting. Transcendentalism teaches us how to live life properly. Next. Any question left?
Oh, I'm sorry, I got myself muted. My God. Yes, sir. I'll just tell you the next question. It was how is uh, transcendentalism related to Wordsworth's idea of pantheism?
Well, this is very clear, because the first started as a Unitarian movement where they focused on the inside in the 1770s, and it was propagated by James Ellery Channing. It focused on the inside, and then pantheism is man, nature, God. Emerson accepts it, and at the same time, Emerson knows that reaching this finality, this realization of God is not all. You have to realize God in material life. You have to realize the divine in material life. This is slightly advanced idea of uh, pantheism. Otherwise, it is almost the same. And there are other things in transcendentalism, like the stress on the individual, like freedom for women. Wordsworth was not quite happy with the feminist poets of the age, like Felicia Hemans. He was not kind to Felicia Hemans. So Wordsworth's pantheism is only restricted to man, nature, God. But what is the outcome? How should we live life so that it helps all who are around us? it is an integral life. It is a collective life we have to live. Even the meditation is not solo these days. Sri Aurobindo has introduced the collective meditation, which helps everybody. And in those in the past, they left us to the forest for silence, for solo meditation. But today, life is also not solo. It has to be lived with all others.
Sir, do I go to the next question?
Yes.
This was a question which I was interested to ask. I actually put it here. That is, sir, you say Emerson did not leave women out. However, he never took account the Black American voices, both men and women. I mean, the poets that who were writing then. So, how would you account for that? A lot of Black American women poets were writing.
Actually, Emerson was not, these black movements were not like the Harlem Renaissance, which started in the 1920s. It did not start with that, but he was against slavery. Emerson was against slavery. He was, and Margaret Fuller was always talking of the black women. So it is not true that Emerson was the black as a movement. It did not start in a full swing at the time of Emerson, but it was growing and Emerson was responding to it in a proper way. There are essays, both by Margaret Fuller and Emerson, where the black issues are taken up. It is not avoided by Emerson. He has written vast output. Like
Yes, sir.
from Emerson, Whitman got it. Whitman has spoken a lot on the suffering of the blacks, on equality. If America read Whitman properly, then America would have been different. But America has forgotten Whitman. That is what the beat poets tried to remind, that read Walt Whitman, you can make equality better in America. But people have forgotten Whitman. And so naturally, they have no time for Emerson.
Yes, sir. And you have already spoken of the benefits of transcendentalism. So I'm not taking the question by Russia because it's actually the same thing. What are the benefits of transcendentalism? I'm moving on to the next question by Dr. R.N.G. Rad. Sir, you mentioned that Emerson's approach was integral. Emerson focused on the influence of nature of man, the Eastern philosophy on the West. Sir, I just want to know Emerson's thoughts on the other spheres of life because integral approach makes a balance between every sphere of life.
Yes. Emerson initially started with the Bible. Then he went back to India. Then he came back again and he went to Heraclitus and other Plato and other Greek philosophers. Then, like Sri Aurobindo, he created a global tradition in his prose. Comparatively, his poetry is weak, but his prose is solidly global. And so that is integral. It rejects nothing of anything.
Yes, sir. And the next question is, why is American Renaissance, this is from Professor Shomi Kuila, why is American Renaissance called as New England Renaissance? It is merely for the imitation, is it merely for the imitation from European ideas?
Uh, it is called by some people New England Renaissance because the New England is a term which became popular for some time, even later when Frost was writing. but it's just a term. It does not signify anything. New England is, it means the America that is very native, and which is a new variety of England. But it cannot be called New England Renaissance because there are plenty of other things other than European thought that is there in Emerson's Renaissance. There are the influences of the Europeans, like I have spoken of Heraclitus, Plato, and others, but a major trace in Americans' thought comes from India. And close to Whitman's place was a library. Close to Whitman's place was a library where Whitman could access the books translated by Ram Mohan Rai. And the style of reading was different. Emerson and Thoreau read thoroughly, and Whitman just took the essence of it because he was a poet. And when Whitman asked Thoreau, have you read the Gita? Then Thoreau answered yes. And Thoreau questioned, have you read the Gita? Then Whitman said, well, a little. So this is the great poet who takes the essence by reading little and using the little in his poetry. And that is the difference between the great scholars and the great poets, the point of receptivity.
Yes, sir. The next question is by Pronita Roy. And she asks, is Elizabeth Peabody's criticism applicable to ideas expressed in Emerson's nature?
What is that? What is the question?
The question is, sir, is Elizabeth Peabody's criticism applicable to ideas expressed in Emerson's nature?
Oh, I am not aware of that. Can you give a gist of that? Then
Yeah,
I can answer.
Pronita Roy. Then it was a question from Pronita Roy.
Hmm. I
She's
haven't
here.
read that. I haven't read that actually.
Yeah.
Yes, sir. So may I audible now? Hello.
Yeah,
Yes.
yeah, you are audible.
Yes, ma'am. I can see that transcendentalist Elizabeth Palmer Peabody, he wrote in her writing, "Egotism, the atheism of today." Here she also denies, actually, the denies others' consciousness to God than our own subjective consciousness. Uh, that is beyond our conception, inconceivable power, wisdom, love, and this criticism wrote in her work. So my question or my query is that, is her criticism applicable to idea expressed in Emerson's nature? Sir, can you understand that my question, sir?
I think you are meaning that subjectivity is not a great reality, and the stress in some transcendentalism was too much on subjectivism, and subjectivism has no relation with objectivity. So this is, I think, the point of attack by your critic. But there is not exactly, I have said, the poet is he who sees the integrity of the whole landscape. It means the inner and the outer are totally fused and no part is left loose. And I quoted from Sri Aurobido's letter that the inner must prepare before the outer follows. So the subjective and the objective are not differentiated. And this is not accepted by the many logical thinkers. They think that the subjective and the objective cannot be linked. I think your line of criticism comes from that point of view.
Okay, sir. Thank you.
Sir, hello.
Hello.
Yes. Yes, sir. The next question is Emerson's idea of the individual was to create space for other individuals. Hence,
Yes.
he believed that influence is something that should not be laid upon the younger generation. But when Emerson stood up for education in America, isn't it so that he himself went on to paving the way out for influence? And I would also like to know Emerson's influence on the Transcendental Club.
Well, that is clear. I have spoken of two kinds of transcendentalism. Emerson influenced literary transcendentalism, what is said and how you say it. To unite, in the words of Lawrence Buell, to unite the seer and the sayer. That is, কি বলছি কিভাবে বলছি, and the fusion of the rishi and the bhashyakar, that one who sees and one who interprets and writes it out. So this is the thing exactly.
Yes, sir. And Sudeshna Jana, she rather repeats the last part of the question, that is of Shorav Kapri, and both want to know about Emerson's influence on the Transcendental Club. And Sudeshna wants to know the role of Transcendental Club in society.
Yes, the Transcendental Club consisted of both the varieties of transcendentalism, which I have said, uh, like the thoughts of George Ripley, Orestes Brownson, Theodore Parker. So in the entire club was not following Emerson's idea of taking it as a literature, but Emerson saw transcendentalism as a thing which should be expressed in terms of literature. And so there is a difference, but ultimately the the appearance of Walt Whitman in 1855, the announcement of Leaves of Grass, it shows the real contribution of Emerson, because Whitman changed the entire complexion of American culture through poetry, because poetry is the highest form of art, and poetry uh, comes at the center of knowledge. So it is a great influence, not just in the club, because many in the club were not in favor of literary expressions. I have said two kinds of transcendentalism. One is philosophical, literature is not important for them. But Emerson was an artist, and my last point was creativity and nonfiction. In that point, the club differed in their attitude, and some were influenced. And of course, Thoreau was one of the uh, great takers of Emerson's thoughts, but he even cut a own path of his own. Thoreau's line of action was totally new. So that way, Emerson was successful in creating Thoreau and Whitman. You can say Emerson created Thoreau and Whitman. And I think this is enough achievement for a human being, that he has been able to create one Henry David Thoreau and one Walt Whitman.
Sir, the last question from Rajesh Chaudhuri, that is not really about Emerson, but the question runs, was Sri Aurobindo influenced by Aristotle?
No, he was not influenced by Aristotle, because Aristotle was a logical thinker and Sri Aurobindo was both logical and intuitive. Sri Aurobindo was influenced by Plato. Sri Aurobindo was influenced by Heraclitus. Sri Aurobindo was influenced by Longinus. But Aristotle is too dry. Sri Aurobindo is a romantic. Aristotle is not a romantic. He is just a dry theoretician. And Sri Aurobindo is full of rasa, and his entire output is the product of Rasadhani of Anandavardhan and Abhinavagupta. So the romantic cannot be a fan of Aristotle. Sri Aurobindo was fascinated by Shakespeare.
Uh, Thank you, sir. I think that is the end of question. So next, although we can never thank you sufficiently for this uh, invigorating real afternoon that you gifted us, however, there is the official and formal valedictory session, and I would please request Professor Shomi Kuila to take over. Professor Shomi Kuila.
Thank you, ma'am. A very good afternoon to one and all gathered here. It gives me an immense pleasure to deliver the vote of thanks for this event to all the dignitaries assembled here. On behalf of the Department of English, Narajole Raj College, we take this golden opportunity to thank the Honorable Chief Guest of this very significant web lecture series, Professor Gautam Ghoshal, former head of the Department of English, Vishwabharati University, Shantiniketan, for his earnest response to our invitation in spite of his very busy schedule. I think this wonderful afternoon today is very much valuable to all of us, for the storehouse of knowledge is once again enriched with innumerable informations, facts, events, etc. I shall try my best to cultivate the illustrations newly after listening to this discussion. So thank you, sir. Now I extend my gratitude to the respected principal, sir, Dr. Anupam Parua, for his heartfelt inspiration and continuous support and cooperation in case of organizing such a wonderful web lecture series that is very much helpful for all of us. Thank you, sir. I would like to thank Professor Nilanjana Bhattacharya, coordinator of IQAC as well as head of the Department of Bengali, Narajole Raj College, for her encouraging support and cooperation to all our endeavors. Thank you, ma'am. I also extend my gratitude to the respected head of the Department of English, Narajole Raj College, Professor Shoma Devrai, for her guidance and overall supervision. It is my pleasure to thank all the dignitaries, distinguished professors, teachers, members, not only for their participation but also for sharing their intellectual thoughts during the session of interaction. Thank you all. I thank all our dear students for their glorious presence in this web lecture series and making a good audience. I sincerely thank to all my colleagues, all the members of technology subcommittee who have made our endeavors to successful one. I would like to thank to the non-teaching staffs for glorifying this web lecture series. I thank one and all once again wholeheartedly. Finally, once again, thank you so much to Professor Milan Mondol, Assistant Professor, Narajole Raj College, Department of English, for his positive attitude and determination in case of organizing such a wonderful web lecture series. Thank you all and have a good day. Over to you, ma'am.
Thank you, Shomi. Thank you so much. For today, I think we will now say goodbye. Thank you, everybody. Thank you.